Was Schubert gay is a question that preoccupied Schubert scholars for 30 years and is still a somewhat open inquiry today, depending on where you fall within the two camps. It all began with the now infamous 1989 article in the musicological journal 19th Century Music by Maynard, Franz Schubert, and the Peacocks of Benvenuto Cellini. The article was so divisive that the journal had an entire volume dedicated to the question in 1993. Invective was thrown, sly insults were written into academic articles, and the Schubert scholar community is still dealing with the repercussions 30 plus years later. My name is Dr. Dominique Royem, and I'm a music director, conductor, and music communicator here to help you achieve a deeper connection to the music you love. Join me today in my opinions chair, where I sit where I'm giving my opinion in a video about something. I will take you through all of the evidence first, then let you know my opinion on the subject. You can form your own opinion, and if you would like a deep dive into this subject, all the journal articles I cite are listed in my bibliography on my website and can be found through JSTOR. Now that's out of the way, let's talk about Schubert's sexuality. The first researcher in this battle is Maynard, a record producer that had a second career in musicology. He was one of the partners that established the Vanguard music label. As a musicologist, he was known for his incisive descriptions of composers' psychological states through biography, primarily in his two books on Mozart and Beethoven. Solomon focused on Mozart's abusive relationship with his father, Leopold, and Beethoven's infatuation with the idea that he was the illegitimate child of the aristocracy. This dive into psychological states of the composers is the first of its kind, and he opened up a whole new era of the interpretation in musicology. In his 2007 article, Taboo and Biographical Innovation, Mozart, Beethoven, Schubert, he outlines the curious refusal of generations preceding him to put anything taboo about great artists, even though he said that all the evidence was there. He says that anything taboo was given a wide berth or even suppressed because they encroach on the forbidden regions of experience. Solomon couched all of these psychological revelations in detailed examinations of the current body of research. Solomon brought all of his psychological and research tools to the exploration of Schubert's sexuality. Homosexuality was on the books in Biedermeister, Vienna as a crime, if one that was more likely punished as a political crime, as discussed in Christina Muxfeld's article, Political Crimes and Liberty, or Why Schubert Would Eat a Peacock. However, it was still taboo. Solomon digs through the diaries of Schubert's circle to pull out tidbits of assertions about Schubert as told by his friends. One such assertion is from a letter from Joseph Kenner, who says, "Anyone who knows Schubert knows how he was made of two natures, foreign to each other, how powerfully the craving for pleasure dragged his soul down to the cesspool of slime." Solomon makes the assertion that few men of Schubert's generation in Vienna regarded relations with prostitutes as immoral, let alone the sign of moral degradation. So this cesspool of slime had to be something more taboo: homosexual relations. Since homosexuality was so taboo, it was always written about in allusions, never directly. The linchpin of Solomon's argument revolves around another journal entry, this time by Edward von Bauerfeld in 1826. Schubert is out of sorts. He needs the young peacocks like Benvenuto Cellini. The reference to Cellini, an openly bi man during the Italian Renaissance whose autobiography, detailing his intimate relationships with both sexes, was widely read during Schubert's time, is enough for Solomon to suppose the same lifestyle was being alluded to for Schubert through this passage. Solomon also notes that the use of the symbol of game birds in Greek and Roman culture was an allusion to prostitutes of either sex, but especially male prostitutes. Solomon reads that Schubert's young peacocks was an allusion to young men, just like Cellini would have needed. Solomon goes on to trace the other lines of evidence in Schubert's friends' diaries, including the fact that a number of his friends said that he had a dominating aversion to the daughters of ease, as Anselm Huttenbrenner wrote. This article created a storm of controversy. Some scholars looked at Solomon's parsing of the evidence and agreed Schubert's sexuality could be called into question. Others vehemently disagreed. The article was actually passed out as a pamphlet at the 92nd Street Y Schubertad on February 2nd, 1992. The 92nd Y is a venerated venue for concerts and conferences about art and music, and is known for being very conservative. Susan McClary gave a paper at the same session assuming Schubert's gayness, called Constructions of Subjectivity in Schubert's Music, where she painted some parts of Schubert's unfinished symphony as reactions to Schubert's homosexuality. During the all-day conference, many of the presenters let everyone know how upset they were about the idea that Schubert might have been gay, calling Solomon, who even wasn't at the event, a pornographer, to the obvious approval of the crowd. This dust-up inspired not one, not two, but 3 articles in the New York Times, all with negative to neutral readings on the Schubert as a gay man debate. Edward Rothstein's Was Schubert Gay? If he was, so what? The debate turns testy. Bernard Holland's Critic's Notebook, Dr. Freud, Can T Really Just Be T? And Edward Rothstein's second article on the topic, Classical View, and If You Play Bolero Backward. In the dusty world of musicology, feathers had obviously been ruffled. Because of all of this turmoil around the subject, 19th Century Music decided to dedicate an entire volume of the journal to this issue. 19th Century Music, Volume 17, Number 1, Schubert, Music, Sexuality, Culture. They had an independent musicologist, Rita Steblin, write an article defending the normal interpretation of Schubert and speaking to the points covered by Solomon in his article. They also allowed Solomon to respond to that article with his own, and then had a number of other musicologists weigh in. Steblin confronts Solomon's research and general attitude towards the well-established text through a very literal lens in her article, The Peacock's Tale, Schubert's Sexuality Reconsidered. She states, "There is no evidence that Schubert's circle buried themselves in pandetics and codes of a clandestine nature or used secretive and distinct argot. The coded references to sexual matters in the Schubert correspondence and memoirs found by Solomon can all be explained in a straightforward manner." To this point, she thinks that reading homosexual activity in Bauerfeld's quote about Schubert is wrong. She believes that the original quote from Cellini had nothing to do with chasing young men or peacocks. Instead, Cellini was talking about birds. There is nothing in the German translation that indicates that these innumerable young peacocks nesting in open air, which Cellini shot with a noiseless powder, were anything but wild birds. Eating this food is what cured Cellini's illness. She goes on to state that Bauerfeld used the quote in the same way she interpreted it from Cellini's writings. All that Bauerfeld meant in his diary entry was that the ailing Schubert needed some kind of cure, some healthy medicine like Cellini's young peacocks to cure his ailment. Since there is no evidence of homosexual coded language in the Schubert circle, there is no need to read any such code into this passage. She crows about it further down, insulting Solomon in the process. Thus, the peacocks of Franz Schubert are not the peacocks of Maynard Solomon. So breaks the one slender reed of evidence. Schubert's chasing after pretty young boys is purely a figment of Solomon's imagination. In his response in the same journal, Schubert, Some Consequences of Nostalgia, Solomon takes Steblin to task for denying the use of any oblique language, especially in the politically charged and governmentally repressive Metterlink Vienna. Taking Schubert's heterosexuality as an article of faith, Rita Steblin will allow no alternatives. Her paper is less a critique than an apologia. It does not significantly advance discussion, but seeks to return to superseded positions. Ouch. As for the center of both papers, the young Peacocks quote from Bauerfeld, Solomon counters, although she devotes several pages to my citations of Benvenuto Cellini's memoirs, one will need to study Steblin's notes carefully to find the only mention of the culminating passage in which Cellini identifies the peacock as a beautiful youth disguised as a woman. The story reference from Cellini's memoirs is that Cellini had brought a young man dressed up as a woman to a dinner, and their host declared all women there were crows compared to the young peacock once revealed as a young man. The issue, therefore, has been poised with rare clarity. There seems no persuasive alternative to the implication that Bauerfeld understood Cellini's young peacocks to be beautiful male youths decked out in fine raiment. Steblin would ascribe to the worldly Bauerfeld an utter ignorance of Cellini's notorious homosexuality, although it is scarcely necessary to have access to 20th century scholarship on the issue, for Cellini himself repeatedly alludes to it in the pages of his memoirs. The bawdy double entendres of Renaissance wit are not so opaque that they cannot be understood by a literate person of a later era. Yowza. He hits home with the overall thesis. Steblin scrubs every opacity, equivocal phrase, or figurative expression of its bawdy overtones, privileging any benign reading, however remote. To think that a politically repressive era, filled with police raiding reading groups and secret societies, had no oblique language is quite a reach. The rest of the journal 19th Century Music Special Edition was filled with most musicologists asking two questions. What does a gay Schubert mean for the interpretation of his music? And can we see Schubert's homosexuality in his writing? These are open questions for consideration in 1993 and now. Since then, Steblin continued to publish against Solomon's assertions, with 1997 articles Schubert's Nina and the True Peacocks in the Musical Times, and In Defense of Scholarship and Archival Research, Why Schubert's Brothers Were Allowed to Marry in Current Musicology, along with Schubert's Peppy, his love affair with the chambermaid Jofessa Pocklofer and her surprising fate in 2008, where Steblin tries to use evidence of a single opposite-sex love affair to refute Schubert's queerness. Others wrote about their objections to some of Solomon's assertions, including the 2000 article in the Musical Times by Marie Elizabeth Tellenbach, Franz Schubert and Benvenuto Cellini, One Man's Meat, where she tries to revisit the Cellini text to try and illustrate that the central quote in Solomon's argument was about hunting birds. So what do I believe? Where do I come down on this issue of Schubert being gay? I think Solomon has a convincing argument, even though I think some of his suppositions stretch the bounds of believability. In my second video about the life of Schubert, which I'll link below, I said that academia is in a position to never really know if Schubert was gay. That was before I had read every single article on the subject. What do I think now? I think that, yeah, there was a good chance that Schubert was queer, leaning more bi than gay. His long-standing emotional friendships with men cannot be overlooked, even though those types of friendships were also in vogue in Vienna at the time. Also not to be dismissed is his professed awkwardness and disinclination to the attentions and companionship of women other than a select few. Will we ever know for certain? Probably not. But there is no reason we can't begin to view Schubert's oeuvre with more of an open mind and try to answer the question that Lawrence Kramer, editor of 19th Century Music, put forth in Schubert, Music, Sexuality, and Culture in the first few pages of the journal. Might our customary ways of understanding Schubert's music be grounded in a systematic misrecognition of the sexual question it possesses? Or how Susan McClary puts it in her essay in the same journal, we may never know with certainty about Schubert's sexuality, yet we do know that Schubert, for whatever reason, was producing constructions of masculine subjectivity that differed markedly from those surrounding him. Put simply, studying Schubert from this perspective can help us unlock the entire repertoire. And reading his music in all its detail from this vantage point offers a valuable alternative to the strictly formalist accounts that have dominated the field in recent decades. If we permit ourselves to study how his life and works relate to the central cultural issues of his day, we might even discover that Schubert was even more innovative and visionary than we had previously thought. Thank you for joining me in this video about Schubert. If you'd like to learn more about the composer, I have a 2-video series about his life and work that I will link below. If you want to read any of these articles I talked about yourself, a bibliography is on my website, DominiqueRoyem.com. Like this video, give it a thumbs up, and subscribe to the channel for more. What do you want to learn about next? Leave me a comment down below. You can also support the making of these videos on Patreon. These videos take over 20 hours of research to complete, so Patreon is a great way to show your support. Interested in seeing my process? I document it on my social media, so follow me for more updates. My handles are listed below. Thanks again, and see you in my next video.